Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Welcome aboard, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Democracy Exchanged with the Depot, the one-stop station where we engage in conversations to foster understanding. I'm your host, Samantha Conrad. As you all know, the 2024 national election is tomorrow, so today we have a very special guest. He is a very prominent political figure here in Ohio and has held political positions in his office, such as the Ohio House of Representatives, Ohio Senate, and most recently, the Chancellor for Higher Education. His name is Randy Gardner. Thank you so much for being on today. We're very lucky to have you.
Great to be back on campus with you. Thank you.
Okay, so to get started here, I'm going to ask you a question. Why did you decide to have a career in politics, and why are you so passionate about it?
Well, it's a great question. It's probably a longer answer than we have time for, but I was always interested in history. I was always interested in politics, even at a young age. But I really didn't decide to go into politics elective office. I was interested and followed it and believed in voting and being involved. But I really studied and came to Bowling Green State University in the College of Education to become a teacher. So I was a history and government teacher for 5 years before I was actually appointed to the Ohio House of Representatives way back in 1985. So I was involved in politics. I worked on campaigns. But I didn't know that it would really result in a career per se, my main occupation being in politics. It just worked out that way. It's been a great ride. I spent 33 years in the House and Senate, 5 years in Governor Mike DeWine's cabinet. And now I continue to get to do some things here on campus and in Ohio, supporting democracy causes, critical thinking, civic discourse and engagement, really my passion.
That's awesome. And for those of you who don't know, Randy Gardner is a very important person for BGSU's Depot. So thank you again for being there for us and being a very important person for us. Now, I'm going to ask you a question about Ohio state politics. Why historically has Ohio been such an important state in terms of national politics?
Okay. Well, some of my history background will come into play on this question. Ohio, one of the larger states. Now, we've been declining percentage-wise versus the electoral power in other states, but Ohio is still one of the larger states in terms of electoral vote count, so that's important. We're a key Midwestern state, and our kind of slogan in Ohio is the heart of it all. And so Ohio was always kind of the heart of the country and the heartbeat of the country when it came to national elections, presidential elections. As I hope most people watching this know, Ohio is home to whether you count 7 or 8 presidents, but we used to be called the mother of presidents. And so we've always had an important role to play. We have a great mix, our economic mix of agriculture and manufacturing. The number of urban centers we have versus other states, we're just a microcosm about a lot what's important in the country. We have a lot of water, the lake and the river, and everything in between. It really was important for issues that are being addressed by the National Congress. Many of them affected Ohio in some way, shape, or form. So I think that added to the magnitude of Ohio's importance politically. But for the most part, a state like Wyoming or North Dakota, with all due respect, they're not going to ever be really prominent in national politics just because of size, population size. So Ohio retains its clout in part because we used to, perhaps more so than today, impact the national politics. And
speaking of that, Ohio used to be more of a swing state.
Mm-hmm.
They used to be it would go Democrat, Republican, and it used to be more diverse in that regard. Why has Ohio in recent years shifted to be a primarily red or Republican state?
Mm-hmm. You probably get a variety of different answers on that question. Just to take you back, when I first was elected, my first race was 1986. I ran as a Republican on the same ticket with former Governor Jim Rhodes. And he did not run very well against Dick Celeste. And so it was a very much, at least a blue state with respect to national or statewide politics. Most of the statewide elected officials in 82 and 86 were Democrat. And that continued for a while until 1990 when Voinovich and Taft won, and then things started to change. But even in the Obama years, Obama carried Ohio, and so it was like that just not that long ago. Ohio was still in play, and it's really not just unique to Ohio. When you look at the presidential election, now here we are on November 4, the day before the election. I'm not going to make a prediction, but we know that there's probably only, I don't think there's just 7 swing states. There's probably 8 or 9 that could go a different way. We just learned about Iowa over the weekend, and I have no idea what's going to happen in Iowa, but a new Iowa Des Moines Register poll shows Harris up 3 in Iowa. A lot of people are discounting that, but it just shows that I don't think it's just 7. Most people have said it's just 7 states. It's probably 8 or 9 that maybe even 10 that could conceivably go a different direction. New Hampshire, Virginia. There's some that are not completely out of the picture. But in terms of Ohio, nobody's thinking about Ohio at this point that could go blue this year, at least in the presidential election. And I think that's too bad for a state when they're not in the center of attention, because I think some of the issues that are important to a state are better addressed if the politics is more closely aligned. And we just don't see that this year. Why is that? The one area of the state that has changed dramatically in the last 20 years is the Mahoning Valley, Youngstown, southeast Ohio, Marietta, along the river, all the way through southeast Ohio, Appalachia. There was a time when that was a pretty strong Democrat area. And now it's become some of the most reliably Republican areas of the state. You'd probably have to talk to someone who has lived and breathed that experience to get a better understanding about that, but it's unmistakable. Youngstown used to be a really hard blue area for Democrats, very reliable. And it's changed significantly over the years. The rest of Ohio, I don't think you quite see the same dramatic shift one way or another. They've kind of, Cleveland's Cleveland, Toledo's Toledo. Columbus, actually, Franklin County has become much more, the suburbs of Franklin County have become much more Democrat, let's say, or at least swing. And there was a time when Franklin County was a very reliable Republican county, and that one actually has shifted more to being Democrat. The vast majority of the state reps in the Columbus area are Democrat today, and that wasn't true at all 20, 30 years ago. So things do evolve, things do change, but from a national perspective, it looks like most of the polls show between 6, 8, 10 points of advantage for former President Trump in Ohio. I have no idea if that's how it's going to play out, but it's likely to. I think he won Ohio by 8 points the last 2 elections. And so you just don't have, I don't know when the last time President Trump or Vice President Harris was in Ohio. I'm just sitting here thinking, and I can't remember when they were here. They've been in Michigan a lot, in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. So the bottom line is it's probably good for the citizenry to have a closer election, because you get a little bit more attention, and some of the issues you care about the candidates have to speak to. So that's not really a defining answer for you, but I don't think it's as much true in a Wood County or in Northwest Ohio as it is in the Appalachian region in Eastern Ohio.
So keeping in the theme of election and voting, obviously, as some of you may know, Ohio has a very important issue on the ballot this year. The goal of issue 1 is to bring an end to gerrymandering, which, very briefly explained, is the process of redrawing the voting district lines to favor your political party in elections. And as I said before, issue 1's goal is to kind of do away with that process. Now, to you, Mr. Gardner, do you think that issue 1 is going to pass in Ohio? And if it does, how do you think that is going to impact future voting?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm trying not to make predictions, but I'll try to speak to it. First of all, let me do just because this is the former history teacher in me. The Gary family, descendants of Governor Gary from Massachusetts, 1811, wish it was called gerrymandering. He pronounced his last name Gary.
I actually did not know that.
Hard G. And this was 1811, and a map was drawn in the shape of like a salamander. So that's how the mandering came. It came from a salamander, and the newspapers called it gerrymandering because he signed the bill. So
no idea.
That's the history teacher in me, so you have to put up with a little history today.
Guess I'll call it gerrymandering.
Well, you can. Then people will look at you and say,
Yeah.
So I sometimes say gerrymandering just because I don't want people to think that I don't know what I'm talking about. But having said that, I understand why people support issue 1, that they believe the districts are not aligned fairly based on one political party. That has traditionally been the case over time. I don't remember, but I know the history of 1970s and 1980s when the other party had the apportionment board and made these decisions. My candid appraisal of issue 1 is that it's very complicated. I don't typically like constitutional language to be that long. It's many, many pages. It's too long. It's too complicated. Does that mean that I think everything's fine? I'm not going to say that. I think there could be. It's too bad people couldn't come together and do something different than this. So from that standpoint, I don't like the language. I don't like the process. But again, it doesn't mean the status quo is okay. So I'm trying to have it both ways, I admit, in my answer. Do I think it will pass or not? One tenet of politics and public policy and elections and voting is that if people are confused or don't understand something, they will generally vote no. So if there's a lot of still undecided, you go into the ballot box and you make your choice. If you don't already know that you're voting yes, you're probably going to vote no, and you're not going to probably be persuaded not to vote yes once you're there by reading the language. So, having said that, the yes side I believe is far outspending the no side, and the general proclivity about government is it's something needs to change. It's not right. We need to fix something. So that's the yes side. It has that advantage going into tomorrow. So I would say that this is going to be closer than what some of the polls have shown. We've done some polling with the Democracy and Public Policy Research Network, otherwise known as DEPO, and just still a large number of undecideds. Marginal support just over 50% on the yes side. And there are some political scientists in Ohio that think that won't hold up on election day. An absolute prediction. I have to admit, I did a prediction last week for someone, a friend of mine, and I said 53. It'll pass with 53.4%. I have no idea if that's even close today. That was a week ago, but I guess neither result. I guess it would surprise me marginally if it didn't pass, partly just because of the numbers and the advertising advantage to the yes side. But I do think because of the complications, because of the longevity of the language, I think that puts the yes side at a disadvantage as well. So what do you think? Am I allowed to ask you a question?
Oh, you're allowed to ask me a question.
You didn't know that was coming, did you?
Although I'm not sure if I'm in a position to say, for most of the political science faculty here that I've talked to, they have said very similar things to what you've said, but okay. I also keep in mind that I voted this weekend, and like you said, the language on the ballot was very complicated, and I have a feeling that people who don't already know what issue 1 is might just skip it altogether, which is essentially a vote no as well, because if you don't vote, obviously, you're voting no. So I think that could make a difference, but like you said, I have seen much more spending on the yes side. So, I mean, if I had to predict my uneducated prediction, I would say it will probably pass. Don't hold me to that if I'm wrong. But if it doesn't, I wouldn't be surprised either, I guess is what I'll say.
I think it'll be fascinating because of the language, and the big issue on issue 1 is proportionality, trying to get the proportion of House members and Senate members to match Ohio's general political landscape. That's really difficult to do, to not split cities and counties multiple times. So if it does pass, I think, and maybe that's one of your next questions, what's going to happen to Ohio if it does? I think that's anybody's guess. There'll probably be lawsuits. There'll probably be challenges to the language. But if it does go forward, I think it'll be fascinating to see how people look at that language and make that language work, even with a so-called independent commission, and try to gain proportionality by not splitting communities, by not splitting cities and counties, even more so than are done today. It'll be a very interesting political science exercise.
Oh, I agree. And to be clear, issue 1 is not inherently a partisan issue. But that brings me into my next point, is that it has kind of been made into one in the election.
Sure.
And just in general, public attitudes surrounding elections are very different today than they were when you first started your political career, I'm sure. And I just wanted you to answer, how has the political climate in Ohio changed since you first started your career in politics?
I think a number of things have contributed to probably a narrowing of our political views. And this is true, I think, even across the nation, not just in Ohio. I think term limits has affected Ohio politics a little bit. I think it has strengthened the special interests a little bit more. Perhaps the executive side, although that was the fear going into term limits. Term limits kicked into full gear in the year 2000, passed in 1992 and 2000, and what you have is legislators by and large with less experience, fewer years of experience, which sometimes leads to, I think, less thoughtful collegiality between members and a working relationship. I think that has changed quite a bit over time. So who's to say what the future yields on that? But I do think that sometimes social media has really added to that in terms of not only the elected officials, but the citizenry. I think people today get their news from a more narrow ideological source. People like to gravitate to their own websites or social media platforms or news outlets, whether it's cable TV or other types of things on social media. And they don't tend to want to listen much to the other side. And I think that's one of the most significant things that frustrates me. One of the phrases I like to think of using is people will learn more when they realize they don't know enough. And people who just talk to people who agree with them, think like they do, read things that you already agree with, you don't grow. You don't think critically, and you don't even challenge yourself on your own beliefs. And so you get kind of stuck in a certain way of thinking. And I don't think that's healthy for democracy. I think that's one of the things I'm excited about the Depot and about this campus and President Rogers and Dr. Alexander and others, the political science department and the students here that are involved. We have a real opportunity to say it's okay to debate and argue and disagree, but civil discourse and a challenging of each other's views is one of the most important things that a democracy needs to thrive. And I've always believed that, going way back to my time as a school teacher. When I was chancellor, I had to make a lot of decisions on major policy issues for higher education. And every time I thought I had a conclusion about the right position or the way to go, I would Google the opposite viewpoint. I would challenge myself why I'm wrong, why I may not be correct. And I think people need to do that more. I think that's inherently more interesting. What a boring life it is just to talk to and agree with. Now, here's what I say, and this sometimes frustrates people, but if someone is completely consistent every day, every issue, they really aren't challenging themselves. No one can be so comfortable in their own beliefs that that they don't think potentially differently on an issue based on new information, based on engaging with someone else. And I just think democracy is weakened when people have those kinds of attitudes. That's a longer answer probably than people listening to this prefer, but I think you ought to think about that. And so much people just accept as the truth. If you get on on Twitter, X, Facebook, other social media platforms, they accept what they read or they see or they hear as being the truth. It's remarkable how people just accept. There'll be a meme that will be sent out there in the social media stratosphere, and people accept that as the truth. And it takes sometimes as little as 30 seconds to fact check something on a reliable source and prove or disprove what someone else is saying. I do that all the time, and I wish more people would do that. And I have a number of examples where it's been really frustrating that even after someone fact checks something and proved that their position wasn't correct, they wanted to continue to use that meme or that information because it helped their own side. No, let's look at the truth. Let's stare at the facts, and let's have a debate.
I 100% agree. Would you say that the increase in political polarization, which is essentially what you described, is just not listening to the other side at all and just being further pulled apart into, I guess, the more extreme ends, do you think that is a problem that has been caused exclusively by social media, or do you think there are other factors that have contributed that as well?
I don't know. How about that for an answer? I don't know. I think social media is a key component. That we get our information so quickly these days. We don't read as much thoughtfully as we used to. We don't read newspapers anymore. People think, what are you doing? You're a hard copy newspaper. We don't even produce newspapers much anymore. So people used to take, maybe life was a little less fast-paced back in the day, but people tend to read more. When you would go to political events, now, except for perhaps one exception today in American politics, you don't make speeches that last more than 10 or 15 minutes. Back in the day, you look at the Lincoln-Douglas debates and you look at some of the presidential campaigns in history, people would go for hours and listen to things. So we don't have the patience for dialogue and discussion today that we used to. And I think that partly causes, we just want our information quickly. If we happen to agree with it, that's good enough for me, and we're ready to go. So I think social media is a part of it. I think the personalities of people who run for office also contribute to it. I happen to be, and I've said this before, and I don't want people to pigeonhole me into one specific political philosophical stance, but I was a student at Bowling Green State University in 1980, and I was the youngest delegate for Ronald Reagan in the country. Went to the Republican National Convention as a Reagan delegate, age 21, taking classes here on this campus, and fascinating, just a fascinating experience. And when I think about the things that happen today and just the language of the politics today, the harsh words that are used are just incredibly different than they were back in the 1980s and 1990s. You wouldn't have heard Ronald Reagan using that kind of language. You wouldn't have heard Bill Clinton using that kind of language. Whether you agree with them or not, George H.W. Bush, are you kidding me? And it's just so different now. It's like you're almost required to use harsher or spicier language in your speeches because that somehow is a motivator. And so that's disappointing to me because I think whether you're a member of Congress, whether you're a governor, a state legislator, a county commissioner, there's a dignity in the office and there's a standard when you relate to the public, your positions that should be a little bit better than that, quite candidly. And I just see that on both sides of the aisle. I see that more often than I wish I did, and it concerns me. It's not necessary. I don't think using some of the language we hear today improves your argument, is more persuasive. In fact, there's some quotes. Probably people watching this program could come up with quotes about people that use that kind of language. It usually means they're not able to convince others with regular common language and dialogue. But so it's a combination of lots of things. I don't know that we can ever completely reverse it, but I hope we can kind of rise above it and do a little bit better, and maybe we can, at least in part, start here at BGSU.
I hope so. That's the goal of the depot,
Right.
as you say.
Right.
Going back to your point about social media again, and just kind of on this topic, why do you think we are seeing more misinformation surrounding national elections than we see in the past? It's at an all-time high. Do you have any suggestions as a follow-up on how to separate factual information from the misinformation that people may see?
Yeah, great question. I don't think that the citizens themselves specifically can fix it, except for being more open-minded and thoughtful about what is said and what information is delivered. Social media, you can do this. You don't even have to. People don't even have to know your name. There's less accountability. When I don't know who's saying this or delivering this information, we're not face to face. We're not actually dialoguing in specific written or video terms. It's out there in the stratosphere, and so when there's less accountability, back in I'll relay this to you. Back when I was in the House of Representatives, we decided to form a time when we came together with the other side of the aisle as leaders to meet. And my attitude was, if you sit across the table from someone else periodically, it's a lot harder to not like them. It's a lot harder to not want to at least discuss and engage with them. It gives you a better chance to find compromise and common ground. But when you're doing this on social media, there's no face-to-face, there's no interaction, there's no human element involved, and I think that just enhances the rhetoric and the shallowness of the debate. I really do. And so I think and again, we're not going to reverse social media. We're not going to. Then you've got AI on top of this, and you've got some people have a hard time even sorting out when there's so-called fake, videos or doctored photographs or videos, and it's amazing how many people accept what they read and say, I can't believe they're saying this. Well, they're not, but so I think it may, sad to report, it may actually get more challenging and worse before it gets better.
I don't disagree with you. I agree with you, but it is a kind of scary thought to think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think, speaking of, we're going on social media a lot today, I think, but it's relevant. Do you think that the younger voter demographics, people who use social media a lot, but specifically, I guess I would say ages 18 to 24, the younger voter demographics, do you think they're going to have an impact on the future of both Ohio and national politics?
They can, if they vote.
True.
I don't know the numbers this year, but typically over time, and this isn't probably surprising because young people, when they're 18, 19, 20, 21, 23, they're in school and they've got so many other interests, they typically don't vote in as high a percentages as people who are middle-aged or seniors, but they have the potential to be very impactful. New voters that are hard to calculate when you have, since the 2020 election, you have millions of new eligible voters, and they can have a tremendous impact on politics. Whether they choose to or not, I haven't seen numbers for this election, but they certainly can have an impact. I remember back, and this, of course, was facilitated by President Reagan coming to this campus in 1984. 1980 and 1984, we had higher turnouts among the students than we typically do. My guess is we'll have a higher turnout on this campus in 84 than we did in 2024. We had over 2,000 students just on the campus dorms voting here. And maybe that's partly because more students are also voting absentee. I've been on campus enough to know that quite a number of students are voting back home or voting absentee, which is fine too, fine just as well. In fact, if I was a student, I'd probably do that because I know the community and I know my county or my city pretty well. But So young people, it's in your hands. The younger generation, it's really in your hands to make a real difference. And I think there's every opportunity on our college campuses to really make a difference on this civil discourse and this coming together, at least to agree to disagree or to have debate in a responsible manner. The college campuses, I think, are the best place to be able to get to achieve that. So there's a number of so-called democracy centers in other campuses around Ohio. Some of them put into law by the Ohio legislature. But I think it's inherently important to democracy and to our community and to our future. And I think there's some exciting possibilities, and that our younger generation can actually lead the way and show how civil discourse and debate, and even the words compromise and common ground, which don't seem to have a lot of political advantage to people who engage in that today, sadly. Let's return to that, and let's get some things done together.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And our final question today is a relatively simple one, but I think it's very important. Why do you think that it's so important to vote? Just round us out.
Okay, we'll try to round it out. Well, number one, let me just say, I read something. I read an editorial. I won't say what paper, but it was like, even if you don't know the issues and you're uninformed, just vote anyway. Now, I'm going to say something. Maybe this is, I don't know whether I should or not, but I will. I'm not into that. You take someone who studies the issues, who reads a lot, who goes to debate, watches the candidates on TV, reads in the issues involved, engages in that important enterprise, and then someone else who doesn't know if they want to vote wakes up the morning and says, "Oh, I don't know. I guess I'll go. I haven't read anything. I don't know who," and just votes. Their vote is equally important. Their vote has the same power. Now, I'm just going to admit this publicly. That's a problem. I don't really like that, because that diminishes then the educated voter. That diminishes the engaged voter. And I'm not saying that I'm smarter than the next person who, not at all. Because very educated people, very engaged and informed people will still come to different conclusions. That's fine. We expect that. So I don't think big turnout in and of itself is the most important thing. I think an engaged, informed electorate should be the goal. Having said that, you also don't want in a democracy, the fewer and fewer people who are engaged, the less stake they have in their country or in their community or in their state. That's not a good thing either. So we want higher turnout. We want more registered voters. We want more people voting, but we also concurrently want more people engaged in the exercise of voting. I just think that's at least equally as important, perhaps even more so. We'll get better government. We'll make better decisions at the ballot box. So I don't, most people, you just hear biggest turnout. The biggest turnout is all that matters, and I respectfully disagree. I think you have a combination of a larger turnout. Let's encourage voting, but let's encourage educated, informed, engaged citizens. Was it Thomas Jefferson that said the most important title of any American is citizen, and one of the most important roles of being a citizen is not only to be a voter, but to be an informed, engaged voter. And if we do that, we'll be stronger. We'll actually come together a little better as a country, and we'll have better decisions.
I couldn't agree more to that statement. And as a political science major, I second that completely. Just for the record, please be informed about your voter decisions. But thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for answering our questions and providing your insight. It's very, very helpful and valuable to everyone. And Just a reminder, Election Day is tomorrow, so everyone make sure that you make an informed vote tomorrow and before. This is our last stop today at the Democracy Exchange with the Depot, and once again, thank you, Randy Gardner, for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I just think
Absolutely.
what you're doing here on campus, your leadership and others here on campus, we've got a chance to make a real difference and just show the rest of Wood County and Ohio how it can be done.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And once again, thank you to the Depot and social media podcast team, Margaret Kolonsky, Samantha Perry, and Maria Lettieri. And special thanks to Falcon Radio, Professor Alexander, our founder. And I've been your host and researcher, Sam Conrad. Join us next time at the Democracy Exchange with the Depot. To find the video version of this podcast, you can find us on our YouTube page at BGSU Depot and the rest of our socials. Bye for now.